The desert doesn't keep secrets. It bakes them into the dust until they're part of the landscape. Out in the unforgiving expanse of the Nevada basin, a lone woman, Eliza May Thornton, was about to unearth a secret that would shake the very foundations of her world. This isn't just a story about survival against the elements or the greed of wicked men. It's the true account of how one act of kindness in the face of desolation summoned a storm of hoofbeats from halfway across the world, proving that the bonds of gratitude are stronger than any border, and that even in the lawless West, honor could arrive on the thunder of 80 horses. The sun over Scorpion Creek, Nevada, was a merciless god in the summer of 1878. It bleached the sky to a pale, hazy blue and cooked the silence into the cracked alkali flats. For Eliza May Thornton, the silence was a constant companion, a shroud she'd wrapped herself in since burying her husband Thomas 2 years prior. He'd had the grit, but the desert had the patience. A rattlesnake bite, swift and unforgiving, had left her a widow at 27, sole proprietor of 160 acres of dust rock and one precious life-giving spring. Her homestead was a testament to defiance, a small, sturdy cabin built of cottonwood and grit, a patch of hardy vegetables fighting for life, and a corral holding a single aging mare named Patience. It was a lonely existence, punctuated by the cry of hawks and the whisper of wind through the sagebrush. The nearest sign of civilization, the ramshackle town of Scorpion Creek, was a 10-mile ride away, a place she visited only for absolute necessities. The townspeople treated her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. A woman alone was an anomaly, a disruption to the harsh order of things. The real threat, however, had a name: Silas Croft, a man whose smile was as thin and dangerous as a razor's edge. Croft had arrived a year ago with money from back east and an insatiable appetite for land. He'd bought up failing ranches, coerced homesteaders, and used the law as a cudgel when it suited him. His eyes were fixed on Eliza's property, not for the scrubland, but for the spring that bubbled cool and clear from a rocky outcrop. In this arid world, water wasn't just life, it was power. Mrs. Thornton, he'd said on his last visit, his voice a slick veneer over raw ambition, his 2 hired guns, Jedediah, and a quiet brute named Finch, flanking him. A woman of your delicacy has no business taming this wild land. I am prepared to offer you a generous sum, enough to see you back to Boston where you belong. Eliza had met his gaze without flinching, her hand resting near the shotgun she kept propped by the door. Mr. Croft, the only thing I plan on taming is your presumption. This land is mine, bought and paid for with my husband's sweat and my own. It's not for sale. Croft's smile had faltered for a second. Everything is for sale, madam. It's merely a matter of finding the right price. That had been a week ago. Since then, the silence around her cabin felt different, heavier, watched. It was on a Tuesday, under the full, oppressive glare of the afternoon sun, that the silence was broken. Eliza was returning from a walk along the dry creek bed, gathering medicinal herbs, yarrow for fevers, creosote for wounds, when she saw it. A flicker of movement near a cluster of sun-scorched boulders. Not a coyote or a jackrabbit. It was something else. Her hand went to the small Colt pistol holstered at her hip. She moved with a caution born of solitude, her steps light on the gravelly soil. As she drew closer, she saw him. A boy. He couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, lying face down in the dirt. His clothes were strange, a dark, tunic-like garment of heavy silk now torn and stained, and leather boots that seemed too fine for this desolate corner of the world. His skin was the color of old bronze, and his straight black hair was matted with dust and sweat. He was unconscious, his lips cracked and swollen. His face, even in this state, was distinctly foreign, with high cheekbones and eyes that, were they open, would have been almond-shaped. He was not Mexican, not Paiute. He was something else entirely. For a moment she hesitated. Taking him in was a risk. In this land, a stranger was a question you might not want the answer to. Croft's threat lingered in her mind. Was this some kind of trick? Then the boy let out a pained, barely audible moan, a sound that cut through her fear. It was the sound of a child in agony. In that instant, he wasn't a risk or a mystery. He was just a lost soul at the edge of death's door. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Eliza knelt gently, turning him over. He was light, frighteningly so. She unhooked her canteen, wet her handkerchief, and tenderly dabbed his lips, squeezing a few precious drops of water into his mouth. He swallowed instinctively, a flicker of life in the vast emptiness. "It's all right," she whispered the words, feeling foreign in the quiet air. "You're safe now." She hoisted him into her arms. He weighed little more than a sack of flour. The walk back to the cabin was a grueling ordeal. The sun beat down, and every step was a battle. She focused on the image of her spring, the cool, clear water that was both her salvation and her curse. Inside the cabin, she laid him on her own bed, the first person to occupy it since Thomas. She worked with a practiced efficiency honed by years of tending to both livestock and her late husband. She stripped off his soiled tunic, revealing a small, exquisitely carved wooden medallion on a leather cord around his neck. It depicted a soaring falcon. She washed him with cool water, cleaning the grime and tending to the scrapes and cuts that covered his small body. His fever was dangerously high. She forced a thin broth of water and mashed herbs between his lips. For 2 days and 2 nights, he drifted in and out of consciousness, muttering in a language that sounded like the rhythmic flow of a powerful river, a tongue she had never heard. It was melodic and guttural at once. During his lucid moments, his dark eyes would fix on her with a mixture of terror and confusion. "Water," she would say, pointing to the cup. "Sue." She didn't know his word for it, but she hoped the sound was universal enough. He would only stare his gaze unblinking. On the 3rd morning, the fever broke. Eliza awoke to find him sitting up in bed, looking at her. The fear was still there, but it was joined by a profound, searching curiosity. He pointed to himself. "Temujin," he said, his voice raspy. "Temujin," she repeated the name, feeling ancient and important on her tongue. She pointed to herself. "Eliza." He nodded slowly. A fragile bridge of 2 words had been built across a chasm of culture and circumstance. He looked around the small cabin, at the sparse furniture, the bookshelf filled with her worn volumes of Shakespeare and botany texts, the framed photograph of her and Thomas on the mantelpiece. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, took in everything. He then slipped off the bed, his movements still weak but determined. He found a piece of charcoal from the hearth, and on a spare piece of wood he began to draw. He didn't draw the cabin or the desert. He drew horses, dozens of them running free across a wide open plain under a vast sky. He drew a circular tent, a gear and figures of a man and a woman, his parents, their faces rendered with a child's simple love. Then he drew himself smaller, chasing a single, windswept mare, and then a swirling vortex of lines, a dust storm. The story was clear. He had been separated from his people, his clan. The word sent a chill down Eliza's spine. A clan. Out here, it made no sense, but the boy Temujin was undeniable proof. Who were they? Where were they? And were they looking for him? The answer to that question, she suspected, would change everything. The presence of the boy Temujin transformed the crushing silence of the homestead into a quiet hum of shared existence. Communication was a game of gestures and sketches. He learned the English words for water, food, and horse. Eliza, in turn, learned that his people called the sky Tenja, and that the falcon on his medallion was a sacred symbol of vision and strength. He was a quick study, his mind a sponge, but a deep sadness clung to him, a longing for his family that was evident in the way he stared at the horizon each evening as the sun bled across the sky. He proved to be more than a patient. He had an uncanny connection with her mare Patience. The old horse, usually cantankerous with anyone but Eliza, became docile and calm under the boy's gentle touch. He would spend hours grooming her, whispering to her in his melodic tongue, his hands moving with an innate understanding of the animal. He showed Eliza how to tie a specific knot in the mare's mane, a small, intricate braid, he said, was for good fortune. This fragile piece was shattered by the arrival of hoofbeats a week after Temujin's recovery. It wasn't the thunder she subconsciously dreaded, but the lazy, arrogant clip-clop of two horses, Silas Croft and Jedediah. Eliza stiffened, ushering Temujin inside the cabin before stepping out onto the porch, her shotgun held loosely in her hand. "Mrs. Thornton," Croft drawled, dismounting with a theatrical flourish. He tipped his hat, but his eyes were cold, scanning her property with a predatory gaze. "I trust you've had time to reconsider my most generous offer." "My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Croft. This is my home." Croft's gaze flickered to the small, newly washed tunic hanging on the clothesline. It was a detail a less observant man would have missed. His eyes narrowed. "You seem to have taken in a guest." Before Eliza could answer, Jedediah, a man whose face looked like a poorly carved piece of driftwood, spoke up, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Saw it myself, boss. From the ridge, a little stray, looks foreign." Croft's thin smile returned, wider and more dangerous this time. He saw it now. Not a complication, but an opportunity, a lever. "Charity is a commendable virtue, Mrs. Thornton," Croft said smoothly, "but it can also be a liability. The desert is a harsh place for a lone woman. Even harsher for one with a mouth to feed that isn't her own. Especially a mouth that belongs to no one knows who." "He's just a child," Eliza said, her voice tight. "He was lost." "Lost? Things have a way of causing trouble," Croft countered. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There are whispers in town. Talk of the railroad gangs that were disbanded last year. Chinese-Irish, but there was another group, hired for their skill with horses. Fierce men from the east. Savages, some say. They vanished into the hills after the tracks were laid. If that boy belongs to them, well, having him here might be seen as theft. Kidnapping even. A federal offense." It was a masterful stroke of intimidation, weaving a thread of truth into a tapestry of fear. Eliza knew of the railroad gangs. The story of a lost clan of horsemen suddenly seemed terrifyingly plausible. "He is under my protection," she stated, raising the shotgun slightly. "You will leave my property, now." Croft held up his hands in mock surrender. "As you wish, but consider this, Eliza." The use of her first name was a deliberate violation. Every decision has a consequence. Some are just more permanent than others. He mounted his horse, gave a final chilling smile, and rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and dread in his wake. The threat was no longer veiled. Croft knew about the boy, and he would use it. The very next day, the consequences began. When Eliza went to her spring, she found the water fouled. A dead sheep, one of Croft's by its brand, had been thrown into the source pool, its bloated carcass contaminating the lifeblood of her farm. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. Cleaning the spring would take days, and her water barrels were already low. It was a calculated, cruel blow designed to drive her out. As she stood there, staring at the defiled water, Temujin came and stood beside her. He looked at the dead animal, then at her face. He didn't need to understand her words to understand her despair. He tugged on her sleeve, his small face set with a strange determination. He led her away from the spring towards a part of her property she'd always ignored, a dry, dusty arroyo shaded by a stand of stubborn mesquite trees. He began pacing the ground, his head cocked, as if listening to something only he could hear. He stopped, stomped his foot, and then began to dig with his bare hands. "Temujin, no," Eliza said, exhausted. "There's nothing there. It's just dry earth." He ignored her digging with a feverish intensity. Intrigued despite her skepticism, Eliza fetched a spade. She dug where he pointed the shovel, striking hard, dry caliche. It felt hopeless, but the boy was insistent, his eyes blazing. He pointed again and again, miming the motion of digging deeper. For hours she labored under the sun, her muscles screaming in protest. The hole grew deeper. 5 feet, 6. The earth was still bone dry. She was about to give up, to collapse in a heap of sweat and failure, when the shovel struck something different. Not rock, but damp, dark soil. A surge of adrenaline shot through her. She dug faster, frantically. An earthy, damp smell, the most beautiful perfume in the world, rose from the hole. A foot deeper, and the soil turned to mud. And then it happened. A tiny, miraculous trickle of water seeped into the bottom of the hole. She dropped the shovel and fell to her knees, tears of relief and disbelief streaming down her face. Temujin crouched beside her, a solemn, proud smile on his face. He dipped his finger in the muddy water and held it up. He hadn't just found water. He had shown her a skill passed down through generations of ancestors who knew how to read the land, to find life where others saw only desolation. The discovery of the new well, a husag as Temujin called it, shifted the balance. They had water. They could survive Croft's siege, but it also hardened Eliza's resolve. This wasn't just about her land anymore. It was about protecting the boy who had in his own way protected her. She knew Croft would not be deterred by a simple setback. His next move would be more direct, more violent. She had to get help. Leaving Temujin hidden in the cabin with strict instructions not to go outside, she saddled Patience and rode for Scorpion Creek. The town's sheriff, a weary, pot-bellied man named Arthur Miller, listened to her story with a sympathetic but tired expression. "Eliza, I hear you," he said, polishing his spectacles. "And I believe you. Croft is a snake, but throwing a dead sheep in a spring, I can't prove he did it. His word against yours. And he's got the money to hire lawyers that'll tie me in knots for months. He's going to come after the boy's sheriff. He sees him as leverage. A foreign boy? Nobody's even reported missing." Miller sighed, settling his bulk back into his creaking chair. "Who do I report a kidnapping to the Paiutes? The U.S. Marshal is 100 miles away, and Croft owns half the men of influence in this county. My hands are tied, Eliza. Unless he breaks a law right in front of my nose, I can't touch him." Eliza left the sheriff's office with a heart like a stone. She was truly alone. As she rode out of town, she saw Jedediah leaning against the general store, watching her. He didn't smile. He just watched, his eyes cold and empty. The message was clear. Croft knew her every move. The shadow of the vulture was circling, and it was only a matter of time before it descended. The blow fell 3 days later at dusk, a time of long shadows and dying light when the world seemed to hold its breath. Eliza had just finished securing the cabin for the night, the discovery of the new well having given her a fragile sense of security. Temujin was inside, sketching another herd of his beloved horses onto a piece of scraped leather. The attack was brutally efficient. There was no warning. One moment, there was the chirp of crickets, the next, the splintering crash of her cabin door being kicked in. Finch Croft's hulking henchman filled the doorway, a hulking silhouette against the twilight. Before Eliza could even reach for her shotgun, he was on her back, handing her across the face. She felt her head striking the floor, the world exploding in a flash of white-hot pain. Through a dizzying haze, she saw Jedediah step over her. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were on Temujin, who stood frozen in terror, the piece of charcoal falling from his fingers. "Come on, boy," Jedediah said, his voice less harsh than usual, almost weary. "No one's going to hurt you. We're just taking you for a little trip." Temujin, small but fierce, let out a cry of defiance in his own language and tried to bolt for the back window. Finch caught him easily, lifting him off the ground like a doll. The boy kicked and struggled, his cries sharp and piercing, in the small cabin. Eliza pushed herself up, her vision swimming. "No, leave him," she choked out, scrambling for her shotgun. Finch turned a cruel grin on his face. "Stay put, lady, or the boy gets it." He held Temujin tighter, and the boy gasped for air. From the doorway, Silas Croft appeared, his tailored suit immaculate against the rustic chaos. He surveyed the scene with the detached air of a theater critic. "A pity it had to come to this, Eliza," he said, his voice dripping with false regret. "But you were warned." He knelt, picking up the small falcon medallion that had fallen from Temujin's neck during the struggle. He examined it, a flicker of genuine curiosity in his eyes. "Interesting craftsmanship, valuable perhaps." He pocketed the medallion. "You'll get the boy back in one piece," he said, his tone shifting to cold, hard business. "All it will cost you is the deed to this miserable patch of dirt. Signed, sealed, and delivered. Have it ready by noon tomorrow. Jedediah will come to collect it. Try anything clever, and the only thing you'll get back is this trinket." He tossed a glance at Finch. "Let's go." They were gone as quickly as they had come, melting back into the darkness. The only sounds left were the creak of the broken door, the buzzing in Eliza's ears, and the echo of a child's desperate cries. Eliza lay on the floor for a long time, the pain in her head nothing compared to the hollow, cavernous ache in her chest. They had taken him. Her inaction, her inability to protect him, was a fresh, gaping wound. She crawled to the spot where he had been standing and picked up the piece of leather. On it, among the herd of horses, he had drawn a new figure, a woman with long hair standing beside him. Her. A wave of cold, clarifying rage washed over her. It extinguished her fear, her despair, and her pain. Croft had miscalculated. He thought he had taken her last hope. Instead, he had forged it into a weapon. She didn't waste time going back to the sheriff. She knew what Miller would say. She was on her own. She strapped on her gun belt, took her shotgun, and packed a small satchel with water jerky and ammunition. She left the broken door agape, a sign of her own broken peace. As she saddled Patience, she noticed something on the ground near the corral. It was the small, intricate braid of horsehair Temujin had tied in Patience's mane for good luck. It must have fallen off during the scuffle. She picked it up and tucked it safely in her pocket, a small token of the boy she had to get back. She knew where Croft would take him. An old, abandoned mining camp nestled in the canyons about 5 miles north. It was isolated, defensible, the perfect place to hold a hostage. She didn't have a plan. She only had a direction and a singular burning purpose. Meanwhile, miles away in the high desert plains, a different kind of search was underway. 2 riders, lean and weathered, sat astride hardy, short-legged horses that seemed to flow over the rocky terrain. Their eyes, accustomed to scanning vast horizons, missed nothing. They were scouts sent out from a hidden encampment. For over a week, they had searched for their Khan's son, Temujin. They had followed the trail of his pony until it was lost in the fury of a dust storm. They had found the pony lame and exhausted, but of the boy there was no sign. Hope was dwindling, but their leader Batu, a man whose face was a mask of iron-willed grief, had ordered them to keep searching. "He is the son of the Khan, the blood of the eternal blue sky," Batu had commanded. "Find him or do not return." One of the scouts, a man named Altan, dismounted. His sharp eyes had caught a glint of something unnatural in the dirt. It was a single spent rifle cartridge, brassy and new. Not unusual in this land, but a few feet away he found something else. A small, intricately braided knot of horsehair. Altan's breath caught in his throat. He recognized the knot instantly. It was a traditional blessing, one every child of their clan learned to tie. He held it up to the other scout Ganbata. There was no need for words. They had found a sign that Temujin was or had recently been alive, and he was near others who used American rifles. They mounted their horses and rode like the wind back towards their hidden valley, back to their Khan. The moon was a cold silver coin in the sky when Eliza reached the ridges overlooking the abandoned mining camp. It was a collection of dilapidated shacks and a collapsed mine entrance. A single lantern burned. In the largest shack, the old foreman's office. She could hear the low murmur of voices and the occasional stamp of a horse. She tethered Patience in a cluster of junipers and crept closer, her shotgun feeling heavy and inadequate. She needed to know how many men she was up against. Peering through a grimy window, she saw them. Croft, Finch, and Jedediah sitting around a table playing cards. In the corner, tied to a chair, was Temujin. He was gagged, his face tear-streaked but defiant. 3 of them. Her against 3 armed men. It was suicide, but the sight of the boy, so small and so brave, steeled her nerves. She had to do something. She was circling around to the back of the shack, looking for a weakness, a second entrance, when she felt it. A low, rhythmic vibration in the ground beneath her feet. It was subtle at first, like a distant heartbeat. Then it grew stronger, a deep, resonant drumming that seemed to rise from the very bones of the earth. She froze, listening. It wasn't an earthquake. It was hoofbeats, not 1 or 2, not a dozen. It was a sound she had only ever read about. The sound of a cavalry charge, the sound of a horde. On the horizon, silhouetted against the moonlit sky, they appeared, a line of riders stretching across the ridge. They moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, not like a chaotic mob, but like a single living organism. They were dark shapes on dark horses, their forms alien and ancient. As they drew closer, the moonlight caught on the tips of lances and the curved contours of bows. Eliza shrank back into the shadows, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it, the clan. Croft's dark prophecy had come true. They had found their boy. Inside the shack, the men heard it too. The card game stopped. Finch drew his pistol, his face pale. What in God's name is that? Croft ran to the window. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. My God, he breathed. The horsemen didn't charge. They flowed down from the ridge and formed a wide, silent semicircle around the camp, cutting off all escape. The drumming of hooves ceased, replaced by an unnerving absolute silence. There were dozens of them, 50, 60, more. A forest of grim-faced warriors on horseback, their eyes fixed on the shack. From the center of the line, one rider emerged. He was a broad, powerful man, with a presence that commanded authority. Even from a distance, Eliza could feel the immense weight of his grief and rage. This was the leader. This was Batu, the Khan. He rode forward until he was just outside the lantern's glow. He said nothing. He simply waited. The silence was more terrifying than any war cry. Inside, panic had taken hold. "We gotta shoot our way out," Finch yelled. "Don't be a fool," Croft hissed, his composure shredded. "They'll cut us to pieces before we get 10 feet. He grabbed Temujin, pulling him to his feet and yanking the gag from his mouth. He dragged the terrified boy to the doorway, holding a pistol to his head. "I have your boy," Croft screamed into the night, his voice cracking. "He is unharmed. Let us pass, and he will be returned to you. Try to stop us, and he dies." There was no response from the silent ranks of horsemen. Batu remained motionless, his face an unreadable mask of stone. From her hiding place, Eliza watched her mind racing. This was the moment, the tipping point. Croft was using the boy as a shield. The clan, seeing their prince with a gun to his head, might be forced to let him go, or they might attack, sacrificing the boy to avenge the insult. She couldn't let either happen. Suddenly, Temujin, seeing his father, let out a cry. It wasn't a cry of fear. It was a single clear word that cut through the tense silence. He wasn't looking at his father. He was looking past the doorway, into the shadows, his eyes searching desperately. He had seen her. He was calling to her. He had called her Mother. In that instant, everything became clear for Eliza. She was no longer a bystander. She was part of this story. She was his mother in this strange, violent land. With her heart in her throat, she made a decision. She cocked her shotgun, the shuck-shuck sound unnaturally loud in the silence, and she stepped out of the shadows and into the lantern light. The moment Eliza stepped from the concealing darkness of the junipers into the stark, lonely pool of lantern light, the world seemed to freeze. The very air grew thick and heavy, charged with the unasked questions of nearly 100 men. Every eye, the terrified eyes of Silas Croft, the calculating gaze of Jedediah, the panicked stare of Finch, and the 80 pairs of dark, intense eyes belonging to the silent horseman, snapped towards her. She felt their collective weight, a physical pressure on her skin. She was a solitary figure, in a worn calico dress, holding a farmer's shotgun, facing down 3 armed captors and an entire warrior clan. By all logic, she should have been the most insignificant person in the canyon. Yet for a suspended heartbeat, she was its undeniable center. From his saddle, the Khan Batu leaned forward. His face a mask of chiseled granite, and grief registered a flicker of profound confusion. He saw this woman, her face bruised from an obvious struggle, her stance not one of aggression, but of unshakable resolve. She was not cowering. She was not pleading. She was claiming her space in the unfolding drama. He saw the shotgun she held and noted with the keen eye of a lifelong strategist that it was not aimed at his men, nor even directly at the man holding his son. It was aimed somewhere else. This was not a variable he could have predicted. Eliza's focus, however, was a laser beam fixed on one man. "Let the boy go, Croft," she said. Her voice, though not loud, sliced through the tense silence with the clarity of a bell. It was steady, devoid of the tremor she felt deep in her bones. "It's over." Croft, who had been balanced on a knife's edge of terror and bluff, stared at her as if she were an apparition. A hysterical, strangled laugh escaped his lips. "Over!" he shrieked, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "You foolish, sentimental woman, do you see them? Look at them. They're savages. They'll slaughter us all for sport. This boy is the only thing keeping our hearts from being cut out." He gave Temujin a vicious shake, pressing the cold steel of the pistol harder against the child's temple. "He is my only way out." But Temujin was no longer looking at Croft. His eyes, wide and dark, were fixed on Eliza. In the midst of this terrifying tableau of brutal men and silent warriors, he saw the one constant he had known for the past week. He saw safety. He saw kindness. He saw his protector. A desperate, powerful cry tore from his small chest, a word that soared over the chasm of language and fear. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated recognition. He wasn't looking at his father, the mighty Khan who had come to rescue him. He was looking at her. He twisted in Croft's grip, his voice rising with a child's unshakable conviction as he pointed a trembling finger towards Eliza. "Tengarin, he cried out in his native tongue, the words a torrent of desperate explanation aimed at his father. "She saved me. He is the demon. She is my sky mother." The effect on Batu was immediate and profound. He did not understand the word demon, but he understood the title his son had used. Tengarin, an honorific of the highest order reserved for a woman of immense spirit and compassion. And he heard the tone in his son's voice. It was not just a cry for help. It was a testament, a declaration of loyalty. The Khan's flinty eyes shifted from Croft's desperate face to Eliza's determined one, and for the first time, he saw her not as a complication, but as the key. Eliza met Croft's panicked gaze, her own expression hardening. "You're wrong," she said, her voice dropping, becoming a cold personal indictment. "They aren't here for me. They aren't even here for you. They're here for him." She gave a slight nod toward Temujin. "You stole their son, a prince for all you know. I just gave him a drink of water." She took another deliberate step forward, the crunch of her boot on the gravel unnaturally loud. "This is your last chance, Silas. Let him go." "Stay back!" Croft shrieked, his composure shattering completely, his finger spasming on the trigger. In that infinitesimal sliver of a second, the world fractured into two precise, coordinated actions. From the silent ranks of the Mongol horsemen, an arrow materialized. There was no grand shout, no warning, just a faint, sharp twang of a bowstring and a sound like silk tearing through the air. The arrow, fletched in black raven feathers, flew with a speed that seemed to bend the light, its trajectory a perfect, lethal calculation. It did not strike Croft's chest or his head. It struck the blued steel of the pistol in his hand. The impact produced a sharp crack, splintering the walnut grip and sending the firearm spinning uselessly into the dust. Croft yelped, staring at his tingling, empty hand as if it had betrayed him. Simultaneously, with the instincts of a homesteader who knew that survival often depended on changing the conditions of the fight, Eliza pulled the trigger of her shotgun. She had never been a sharpshooter, and she didn't try to be one now. Her target was not flesh and blood, but light and glass. The 12-gauge roared its blast, echoing like a thunderclap off the canyon walls. The lantern exploded in a shower of broken glass and extinguished flame. The clearing was instantly plunged into a disorienting absolute darkness. The only illumination was the cold, indifferent light of the distant moon, which cast long, confusing shadows and rendered everything in shades of grey and black. For a moment, there was only the ringing in Eliza's ears. Then the blackness was punctured by a flash and a deafening bang as Finch, utterly panicked, fired his pistol blindly into the night. Another flash lit up his terrified, contorted face. He was a man drowning in a sea of his own making. But from the edges of the clearing came a different kind of sound. Not panicked chaos, but disciplined purpose. It was the whisper of movement, the soft scuff of dozens of leather boots on dirt, the rustle of clothing. The warriors had dismounted and were moving in. They were not a mob. They were a pack of wolves, silent and efficient, using the darkness as their cloak. Finch's wild shot was answered not by another gunshot, but by a sudden, choked gasp. In the next brief flash of moonlight, Eliza saw his shape go down, overwhelmed by a swarm of shadows. There was a glint of steel at his throat. He was neutralized. Jedediah, ever the pragmatist, had seen the impossible arrow shot. He had seen the woman's tactical blast. He knew this was not a fight, it was a reckoning. He had dropped his gun the moment the lantern shattered, and now stood with his hands raised high above his head, a statue of surrender in the gloom. Then two powerful dark shapes were on Croft, grabbing him before he could even process the loss of his weapon and his hostage. His scream of surprise was cut short as he was lifted from his feet and slammed to his knees, his arms twisted behind him with brutal efficiency. Amid the chaos, Temujin was suddenly free. He stood for a second dazed, then his head whipped around, searching the darkness. "Eh," he called out, his voice small and trembling. "I'm here," Eliza answered, her voice thick with emotion. He ran, not toward the formidable figure of his father, not toward the warriors of his clan, but toward the sound of her voice. He slammed into her legs, his small body shaking uncontrollably, and wrapped his arms around her waist as if she were the only anchor in a storm-tossed sea. He buried his face into the rough fabric of her skirt, and his muffled sobs were the sound of a nightmare ending. Eliza dropped the heavy shotgun, its purpose served, and her arms enveloped him, holding him tight. The tears she had refused to shed for her husband, for her loneliness, for her fear, finally broke free, silent streams, tracing paths through the grime on her cheeks. The Khan Batu dismounted. He moved into the clearing, his heavy leather boots making no sound on the dusty ground. His warriors, having secured the prisoners, parted before him like water around a great stone. He walked, not with the swagger of a conqueror, but with the deliberate heavy tread of a father who had stared into the abyss of losing his child. He stopped a few feet from Eliza and the boy who still clung to her. For a long moment, he simply looked at them. He looked at his son, alive and safe, and then his gaze rose to meet Eliza's. He saw the dark bruise blooming on her cheek, the exhaustion that radiated from her, and the fierce, undeniable tenderness with which she held his son. In her eyes, he saw not pity or triumph, but the shared universal truth of protectiveness. He saw everything. He spoke, his voice deep and resonant, the language of the steppes filling the night air. A warrior older than the rest, with a calm, intelligent face, stepped forward to stand beside his Khan. His English was formal, heavily accented, but perfectly clear. "The Khan Batu asks who you are." "My name is Eliza May Thornton," she said, her voice regaining its composure as she stroked Temujin's hair. "This is my home. I found your son in the desert. He was near death from thirst. I did what anyone would have done." Batu listened intently to the translation, a slight nod, his only reaction. He then gestured with his chin towards Croft, who was now being dragged forward by two warriors, his fine suit torn and covered in dirt, his face a mask of sniveling terror. "This man," the translator said, his voice flat, "the Khan asks if he is the one who brought you harm. And to the child, he tried to steal my land." Eliza stated, her words simple and direct. "When I refused to sell, he poisoned my spring. When I found another source of water, he stole your son. He meant to trade him for my deed." As the words were translated, Batu's face hardened, the lines deepening, until it looked as though it were carved from unforgiving stone. His eyes, fixed on Croft, turned to chips of black ice. He uttered a short, guttural command. The warriors forced Croft to his knees in the dirt. The land developer looked up at the sea of grim, merciless faces surrounding him, at the towering figure of the Khan, and his last shred of bluster finally crumbled into dust. "Mercy," he begged, his voice a pathetic whine that was an insult to the vast silence of the desert. "Please, it was all a misunderstanding, a business deal gone wrong. I'll pay. I have money. I have gold. Name your price." Batu's lips curled in a sneer of utter contempt. He spoke again, his voice as cold and final as a winter grave. The translator's voice followed a chilling echo. "The Khan Batu says, the sky has no price. A child's life has no price. Your life has a price, and it is forfeit." What happened next was a form of justice as old and unforgiving as the steppes themselves, swift and brutal and absolute. Eliza instinctively turned away, pulling Temujin tightly against her and shielding his eyes from the sight. She held him fast, a living shield against the grim sentence of the desert being carried out behind them. When an unnerving silence fell once more, it was over. Batu then turned his attention to Jedediah, who had remained frozen in a posture of surrender. The Khan looked the hired gun up and down a long, appraising stare. He spoke, and the translator conveyed the judgment. "You are a wolf who follows a weak alpha. You did not fight when the odds turned. You dropped your weapon. You have the sense of a dog that knows its master is beaten. The Khan has no use for you, but sees no honor in killing a coward. Go, run from this land, and never let the sun set on you here again. If my scouts see your face in these hills, they will not be so merciful." Jedediah didn't need to be told twice. Without a word, he turned and scrambled away into the darkness, a ghost fleeing a reckoning he had narrowly survived. Finally, the great Khan walked toward Eliza. The fearsome warlord who had just passed judgment was gone, replaced by a father. He knelt not in supplication to her, but to be on the same level as his son. He placed a large, calloused hand on Temujin's head and spoke to him in their tongue, his voice a soft rumbling murmur, filled with a love so profound It needed no translation. Temujin answered him, his small voice muffled against Eliza's dress, and he pointed again at her, speaking her name with reverence. Batu stood and faced her fully. The air of menace was gone, replaced by a gratitude so immense it was humbling. He placed his right fist over his heart and gave a slight formal bow, an acknowledgement of respect from one sovereign spirit to another. The translator spoke his own voice, now imbued with a softer tone. The Khan Batu of the Tengerin Kumus, the Sky People, gives you his gratitude. You saved the blood of his blood. In doing so, you have saved his soul. He has heard his son's words. He bestows upon you the name Tengerin Ek, the Sky Mother. Our law, our soul demands that a life debt be paid in full. Ask for anything. Gold from the mountains, 100 horses' weapons, to make you a queen in this land. It is yours. Eliza looked from the translator to the Khan's sincere, waiting eyes. She looked at the scores of powerful warriors, at the immense potential wealth they represented, and then she looked down at the small boy who still clung to her. She smiled, a true, weary smile. She knew what she wanted. "I want for nothing," she said, her voice finding its strength and its truth. "Keeping your son safe was not a transaction. It was my duty as a human being." She gently tilted Temujin's chin up and looked into his eyes. "His friendship has been payment enough." Batu listened to the translation, and for the first time that night, a slow, genuine smile spread across his stern face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. It was a smile of surprise, of wonder, and of deep, profound respect. He spoke, and the translator smiled as well. "A Sky Mother asks for nothing," he relayed, "so she shall be given the respect of everything." Batu issued a series of quiet commands. At his gesture, one of his men led forward a magnificent horse. It was a stallion, as black as a moonless night, with intelligent, fiery eyes and powerful limbs. Its saddle was of dark tooled leather, intricately inlaid with polished silver conchos that gleamed in the moonlight. Another warrior came forward and laid a heavy, beautifully woven wool blanket at her feet, its patterns telling stories of sky wind and horses. A third presented her with a long, gracefully curved bow and a quiver of black-fletched arrows. "This is not a payment," the translator explained carefully, his tone conveying the importance of the distinction. "This is a statement. The horse is for swiftness, so that you may never be caught unaware again. The blanket is for warmth, so you may never feel the cold of loneliness. The bow is for your protection, but you will not need it. From this day forward, this land, these hills, this spring, this home is under the protection of the Sky People. No one will ever harm you again. This we swear on the eternal blue sky which sees all." Batu stepped forward. He reached into Eliza's pocket and gently, reverently took out the small, intricate braid of horsehair she had saved. He walked to the black stallion, and with the great care of a man performing a sacred ritual, he tied the blessing back into the horse's flowing mane. A blessing given, and a blessing returned. He looked at her one last time, a universe of unspoken gratitude passing between them. Then, with a fluid grace that belied his size, he mounted his own horse. He gave a final solemn nod to Eliza, a farewell to the Sky Mother. With a single silent hand gesture, he turned his horse. As one, the 80 horsemen mounted and turned their movements, a synchronized ballet of men and animals. Without a backward glance, they flowed back up the canyon and into the vast, dark desert as silently and mysteriously as they had arrived, taking their son, their Khan, and their ancient justice with them, leaving nothing behind but footprints in the dust. Eliza stood alone in the quiet moonlight, the great black stallion standing placidly beside her, its warmth a living presence. The cabin door was broken, the ground was scarred, but her world was irrevocably, profoundly changed. She was no longer Eliza May Thornton, the lonely widow on a forgotten patch of dust. She was Tengarian Ech, and she was for the first time in a very long time truly, unshakably home. The silence that returned to the canyon was not one of emptiness, but of a deep and watchful peace. That is the story of Eliza May Thornton and the lost boy who brought a nation to her doorstep. Her act of compassion didn't just save a child, it forged an alliance that echoed through the canyons of the Old West. Silas Croft's greed was swallowed by the dust, but Eliza's courage earned her the one thing money could never buy: unshakable honor and the protection of 80 of the most formidable warriors to ever ride the American plains. Her homestead flourished forever, watched over by unseen guardians, a testament to the fact that even in the most lawless of times, the strongest forces are not hatred and greed, but kindness and gratitude. If this story of unexpected heroism and cultural collision moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who loves a real-life drama. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the forgotten tales that shaped our world. Thank you for listening.